The numbers are getting out of hand. Nearly 500,000 Aussies might discover the hard way that their phone can't dial 000. Optus told regulators it has around 470,000 Samsung devices on its network that in a worst case scenario may be unable to call 000. Yes, 470,000. I can't keep up anymore. One day it's 4,000, the next it's nearly 500,000. Either way, that's a lot of missed calls to emergency services. In the background, telcos have quietly been blocking thousands of old Samsung models and manually testing hundreds of thousands more to see if they can still make emergency calls. In case you think this all sounds made up, it even led to that big parliamentary grilling a few months back, with the CEOs of Optus, Telstra and Vodafone being asked a few questions in Senate inquiry. You can almost remember hearing the senator say, "So gentlemen, why might your networks let Granny's phone fail her in a heart attack?" Welcome to a short dirt report about what's still a massive problem. Let's get started by rolling the intro. So apparently updates are the fix if people actually bother. So there is a bit of good news. Of those nearly 470,000 phones out there, only about 4,158 truly can't be saved by a software update or software magic. This is the number that's been quoted the most. And in other words, it's roughly 0.9% of the at-risk devices, and those are effectively bricked. The telcos plan to block them on the network by January. So you've got maybe 30 days. The rest, they say, can be patched. Regulators told senators that a software update would likely fix the vast majority of the affected phones. And Samsung itself admits that models over 7 years old should be replaced. At the same time, completely unrelated, Samsung talked about a sale event on their latest Samsung phone, but also reassured us that most of the phones affected could be fixed with a software update. But there's also a sale on our phones. Now, I love the could because it's an easy out. And in plain terms, if your phone is brand new-ish, a simple update should do the trick. Now, unfortunately, getting people to install updates is like convincing a cat to do algebra. Phone makers and carriers are giving customers around 28 days after notifications to update or replace the device. Otherwise, it will be blocked. But try telling that to someone who hasn't updated their phone since Neighbours first aired in color. Most users ignore these notifications until their phone basically won't let them do anything anymore, or until we guilt trip them on TV with something like Save the Kids. In saying that, I used to avoid Windows XP updates like the plague. Though let's be honest, XP ran best after a good clean install, so maybe we're onto something? Now, there's a lot of testing confusion, so how do you find out if you're doomed? Officially, telcos beg you not to dial 000 just to test it. I will also ask you not to do that, unless you have to, obviously in an emergency. Apparently, they don't want emergency operators sitting on hold while amateur techies tinker. In practice, people suggested all sorts of hacks, none of them foolproof, and I obviously didn't test them, but they said dial +61 000. Use 112, which is obviously just Australia, then forwarding it to 000 anyway, or even the mythical Telstra 001 test line. But for Samsung users, one tip was to manually switch network operators in settings to say Optus to Vodafone, for example, and then dial 000. But again, don't dial 000. The whole point is not to. Apparently, this would potentially load an emergency profile, but then it's actually missing if you can't dial. So even swapping SIMs won't help. Now, everyone I reached out to in the industry let me know that they pretty much agree. There is no simple nor public self-test. All this will just inevitably confuse someone and put lives at risk. After all, nobody wants to dial 001 in a real emergency by accident. In short, unless you're a phone geek, the only test is the ultimate test, calling 000 for real, which of course defeats the purpose of testing. So don't do it. If you've got a phone that's in the bucket of 4,300, 700 phones, maybe it is time. Get a second-hand phone that works. So now that means users will have to take the telco's word for it, which, well, history says maybe not. Not a few days ago, a network server was the cause of a lengthy outage impacting around 95,000 Optus NBN customers in Brisbane and, of course, parts of Queensland. Was that an update that wasn't updated. So now you might be asking yourself, Samsung? Why Samsung? Why is this mostly about Samsung phones? And are 10-year-old phones actually modern? Well, it turns out Samsung's older Android handsets had a quirky LTE 4G calling system. The Vodafone emergency calling settings were simply never included in the firmware, while Telstra and Optus had working profiles. And it was dozens of older Samsung models on Vodafone that first flagged the problem after the 3G shutdown. Other brands such as Apple, Huawei, and so on use a different system and inherit the correct settings. So if your phone is not a Samsung or is a newer one, you might be very lucky, and probably are. But here's the question, should that 7 to 10-year-old phone still count as modern and get full support from Samsung? For context, Samsung's official line is pretty blunt. If your device is that old, replacement is the safest bet. Many manufacturers only promise OS updates for 3 to 5 years. After that, it's buyers beware. And look at Apple, it dropped updates for some phones after 6 to 7 years too. Yet these telco rules say emergency calling must work even through outages or on another network. So legally, even a 2015 era Samsung should make 000 calls in 2025. So does that seem reasonable? Are we expecting a decade-old phone to handle cutting-edge networks? I mean, when the 2G networks got shut down, did you expect your old Nokia bricks to work? Maybe not. But let's not forget the root of it all. Just like 2G, we shut down 3G. Australia's 20-year-old 3G network was turned off last year over January and November period to make room for more 4G and more 5G. The idea was progress, but it removed the fallback for voice calls. Before, any dumb old phone could drop to 3G if 4G failed. And regulators actually acknowledged that carriers focused on customers' 3G only phones first, then looked at 4G phones that defaulted to 3G for emergency calls. And the kicker, the Samsung Vodafone issue only showed up months after 3G was off. In other words, if 3G was still live, most of these old Samsung would just roll back to it and ring 000. But no, we had to turn it all off. Maybe next time the politicians and telcos decide to pull the plug on an entire network, they'll remember this fiasco. 4G, they're coming for you. Now, in the other side of the same coin, there's a small number of people with older phones, but I will add that having a backup network is still valuable. So I still think there's some room for it, but not every phone has the new satellite emergency messaging system, for example, which can be that backup. My Apple phone now says, hey, if you get stuck, you can use the satellite to send an emergency message. In the meantime, if your phone prompts you to update, it may just be worth the tap, because the only thing worse than not updating is needing emergency help and realizing the phone can't dial 000. Friends, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's report. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!